Today, we are talking about motion blur. Why does it sometimes look awful? Why does it occasionally refuse to work at all? And what can you do when the standard motion blur switch simply isn't enough? I'll show you a few lesser known settings, 2 built-in effects, and a couple of third-party tools you may want to consider. By the end, you should be able to create smoother, more realistic motion blur and better-looking composites. Before we begin, let's quickly define motion blur. In photography, video, film, and animation, motion blur appears as streaking or smearing around a moving object. It happens when the image changes during a single exposure, usually because the subject or camera is moving quickly. A faster shutter speed captures a shorter slice of time, which reduces motion blur and creates sharper, more staccato movement. A slower shutter speed exposes each frame for longer, producing more blur and smoother looking motion. As filmmakers and motion designers, we usually want some motion blur. Without it, movement can feel overly sharp, mechanical, or disconnected from the footage. When we add or replace an element inside a shot, our job is to match its motion blur as closely as possible. Otherwise, even a technically perfect composite can still look fake. In After Effects, as in many compositing applications, we have control over several motion blur settings, including shutter angle, shutter phase, and the number of samples used to calculate the blur. In this example, I've already tracked the sign using Mocha AE. And because we are looking at it from the inside of the shop, I think we should actually see the opposite side of the sign, assuming, of course, the shop is open for business. I know it's slightly confusing, but I've already taken the liberty to create the reverse side, which looks like this. Now I can return to the main video here, and in the Mocha AE effect, I'll click on Create Track Data. Then I'll select the layer I want to export the tracking data to, which is my replacement sign, and choose corner pin with support for motion blur. Now I'll apply the export and preview the result. As you can see, some motion blur has been applied, but it isn't enough. If I switch off the replacement layer and look at the original plate, we can see that the real sign has considerably more motion blur. So let's try to match it. We can control this by opening the composition settings and moving to the Advanced tab. This is where we can adjust the overall motion blur settings, including the shutter angle, shutter phase, and sampling quality. So the shutter angle controls the amount of motion blur. The higher the value, the longer each virtual exposure lasts, and the more motion blur we'll see. So you can use this creatively to make relatively slow-moving layers smear more dramatically, or more practically to match the motion blur found in live action footage. Because the preview checkbox is enabled, I can actually move this panel to the side and see the result while I update the values. So in this case, I think I need to push the shutter angle all the way to its maximum value of 720 degrees. Now I can adjust the shutter phase. Shutter phase controls where the motion blur is positioned in relationship to the current frame. In most cases, a good starting point is to use the negative value equal to half of the shutter angle. So since my shutter angle is 720 degrees, I'll set the shutter phase to minus 360 degrees. Now, samples per frame controls the number of motion blur samples used by the classic 3D renderer. At the moment, neither the Cinema 4D renderer nor the Advanced 3D renderer supports native motion blur, so stick around because I'll show you a workaround very shortly. Now, when native motion blur is enabled, as it is over here, and you notice some steppiness or echo-like pattern, you can increase these samples per frame value up to 64. Just remember, more samples also mean longer rendering times. After Effects always finds a way to collect its payment. So the next door neighbor, the adaptive sample limit, sets the maximum number of subframes that After Effects can calculate for 2D layers. After Effects can analyze the motion of a layer and decide how many subframes are needed to avoid visible echoes. The maximum value here is 256. I usually leave this at its default settings. Okay, so now let's click OK and preview the result. Great, I think this looks so much better. And now let's see what we can do when motion blur cannot simply be activated from the timeline. To demonstrate this, I'll use this composition from my After Effects Insider course with School of Motion. In this course, I share everything I've learned from more than 30 years of using After Effects. If you choose to join me, you learn how to customize your workspace, improve performance, build reusable templates, integrate 3D models, and uncover powerful workflows that can save you time on real projects. If you want to become a better motion designer and take your After Effects level further, this advanced course may be exactly what you are looking for. You'll find more details down below. Now, back to the composition. It looks really promising, but it's missing the smearing we would expect to see when the camera spins so quickly around those elements. Because I'm using the advanced 3D renderer, native motion blur is currently disabled. We can enjoy depth of field, which is great, but we still don't have motion blur support. I hope Adobe adds it in the future, but until then, let me show you some options that we currently have. We'll begin with two built-in effects, Pixel Motion Blur and CC Force Motion Blur. In both cases, the best approach is to place the original composition inside a new composition. And this usually helps the effect that we are going to use to be more efficient because we are giving them a clean, flattened image to analyze. So I'll do exactly that, and I'm also going to add the suffix MB to the end of this composition name just to remind my future self that this version contains post-processes motion blur. I know future me will still be confused, but at least I tried. Okay. So we'll start with Pixel Motion Blur. I'll apply it using the Quick Apply search, and we can immediately see its contribution. If I'll preview the composition using the current settings, it will take a while to process. So let's speed up this recording until we can see the final result. So this is how it looks. Let's now stop near the beginning and examine the quality one frame at a time. As you can definitely see, it doesn't look particularly good. We have several settings to experiment with, including shutter control, shutter samples, and vector detail. Increasing the shutter samples can create smoother blur, while vector detail change the accuracy and density of the motion analysis. However, even after increasing these values and trying to improve the direction and quality of the blur, the result still doesn't look convincing. It's also quite slow to render. So let's switch off this effect and try another member of the time category effects. And this is CC Force Motion Blur. So I'll apply the effect the same way. And this one is generally a better choice for animation because it generates motion blur by sampling the changing image across multiple points in time. It works best when applied to a pre-composed result. However, unfortunately, it's even slower to process. If I increase the motion blur samples to 16, the composition becomes almost unusable. Each frame can take 3 seconds or more to calculate, depending of course on your hardware and project settings. The result, though, looks much better. So if time is not the essence, you can use this effect, start to preview, and then take a break. Maybe a quick coffee, perhaps even lunch, depending on the composition. You may even have time to reconsider your career choices. In any case, I'll jump ahead to the finished preview and play for you this 3 seconds timeline so you can judge the result for yourself. Before my computer fans become louder than the sound of thunder, let's have a look at two paid options so we can see the full picture. The first option is the industry standard plugin from Revision Effects called RSMB, which stands for Real Smart Motion Blur. This effect is much faster than the built-in options and is available for several host applications, so you can actually use it inside your editing software. It is GPU accelerated, and if you have motion vector paths from a 3D application, you can actually use that to generate more accurate results. By default, RSMB analyzes the movement automatically, So we can then use the blur amount control to increase or decrease the strength of the motion blur. And we can also animate this value if the shot requires different amounts of blur over time. As you can see, it looks fairly good while the animation is playing. However, if I'll pause the preview and step through the result one frame at a time, you can see that the motion blur becomes inconsistent in certain areas. That's probably because of the camera animation changes and the speed that everything is moving here, which is quite dramatically. And as with the previous option, these artifacts are much less noticeable during playback, but still, let's look at one more alternative so you'll have all the current options. So I'll switch off RSMB and apply BCC plus Motion Blur ML. And this effect uses machine learning, as you can tell by the name, which is just another way of saying AI without upsetting some of the audience. Now, this is the fastest option so far. It works practically in real time, and it also seems to understand the rotational direction of the animation, which gives us more accuracy results. However, the default outcome that we are getting here is a little too strong to my eye. No problem. I can reduce the shutter angle to, let's say, 90 degrees and then set the shutter phase to minus 45 degrees. And I think that this produces the most convincing result for this particular animation. But as always, it's not about what I prefer, it's about which one works best for your shots, your deadlines, and your tolerance of rendering. Let me know in the comments which option is your favorite. Also, please enlighten me if you're using another motion blur tool or technique that I haven't mentioned. I'm always interested in discovering another way to make After Effects work harder so we don't have to. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you to improve your motion blur in your projects, and I will see you again next time.